Okay, now in the last video we created our site folder, we connected that through Dreamweaver, and we created our first page, which is our movie Dreamweaver template. This is a template page which all of our other pages will be based off of. This page will not be published. In Dreamweaver, remember we have the live view, which shows you how it looks on the internet, the split view, it shows you the live view and the code view, and we can also look at it as just the code view. Let's look at the code view side. Here we have the doc type. It is the HTML document, even though it's a template. We have our HTML opening and closing tag, just like before. We have the head section at the top, head opening and closing tag. Now you can see a few things here, the metadata, the template beginning editable name. So this is telling me this is a template and I will be able to make it editable. It's not editable right now, but we will make it editable before we create our other pages. Now we don't really need to give this a title, but we could give it a title, and I'm going to call this movie space template. Now this will show on the browser title bar, and in this title we could use capital letters and actual spaces. We should not use underscores here. Our next main area is the body area, denoted by the opening and closing body tag. Remember, most of what is visible will be within this body tag, within these body tags. So I click to the right of the body tag and hit enter or return, and it puts me down in the next line of code. And we're going to put our first element in here. Now in our last project we just typed text, formatted the text. We didn't really have any layout parts, any way to lay out the website. In this website we're making a strictly arranged layout. Now this is not responsive. We will do a responsive website in our next project. This is a fixed layout website, and this will help us understand a little bit more the power of CSS. So I'm on this first blank line and I'm going to put in my first element. This is going to be an HTML element. I will have to go to the insert panel here and HTML. Now if your insert panel is not open, or insert window, you can go up to your window and click the insert and make sure that is open. So the insert HTML section. Now remember, there's all type of things we can insert, all type of other things, but we're going to go to our HTML. If I scroll down, I see there's quite a few different selections. We're interested in more of the layout selections. The first thing we're going to create is a div tag. I click on the div tag and it's going to say where I want to put this div tag. It's going to go at the insertion point. That's where my cursor was. Now at the same time, this will allow us to make a CSS class or a CSS ID. We used some of these classes or IDs last project, and we also refer to them as selectors. Remember, those are the different styles that we can add to our website. And each selector could have all those different properties. We could type this all by hand, or Dreamweaver allows us to create the code through this interface here. Either way is fine. We're going to make this an ID, and we're going to call this the container. Container. Make sure you spell that correctly. No capital letters. C-O-N-T-A-I-N-E-R. This is going to be a new CSS rule. Now it brings us to this interface, to this window. It says it's a selector type. It's an ID. Now the IDs in CSS are recorded with a hashtag in front of the name. Hashtag container. The classes are recorded with a period or dot container. ID is used only once per page, and typically we would do the container with as an ID. Now this is giving me a message saying this selector name will apply your rule to any HTML element with ID container. That's fine. Next important thing down here, very important, very important. Where do I want to save this new code, this CSS code? Do I want to save it on this document like I did last project? No, I don't. I want to click this button, or this arrow. I want to create a new style sheet. This is our first CSS code we're creating in this website. So this is giving us an opportunity to make a new document, an external style sheet to save my CSS code. So very important, you click New Style Sheet. Okay. Now what Dreamweaver is doing is going into my site folder or root folder and letting me save this document. I'm going to save it in our CSS folder that we already created. We're going to call this movies.css and save. We'll look at that document in a second. The next step Dreamweaver does is brings us to some of the CSS properties. Now we can also see these properties eventually through the CSS Designer panel up here, but when we initially create the CSS selector or ID, Dreamweaver will let us add some of the different properties through this window. You could do that, that's fine, but I'm going to skip this for now and click OK. And OK. Now there's my new div ID container, div opening and closing tag, and Dreamweaver by default will put some text within this div tag. I don't want that text. Let's highlight that white text. It says content for ID container goes here. Let's highlight that and delete that. Make sure you do not delete any of these brackets or any of this other div code. Keep that div container there. Alright, let's look what happened with the CSS file. I'm going to show you my site folder, images. There's my template folder that Dreamweaver created with my Dreamweaver template. It must stay in that folder. And don't duplicate it and make a whole bunch of new ones. I'm clicking the CSS folder. There's my new movies CSS file. So Dreamweaver really helps you organize your folders. Let's come back in here to Dreamweaver, to the code side. Now we have the source view, which is the original HTML code, and now we have the movies CSS code. There's access to that new movies.css file, and there's a document list at the top, and the name of any of my CSS selectors and properties will be right down here. There's my hashtag or ID container, and there's those brackets, and remember from last project, all of our properties will go within there. And as we add more CSS rules, they will be added down here. Let's go back to the source code and click within between those two div container brackets. Let's hit enter. I hit enter here a couple times. Everything else will be, all my other layout areas will be within the container opening and closing tag. So we're within the body and within the container. Let's click within there and add our next element, our next layout element. And that's going to be our header. Once again, I'm on the Insert panel, HTML, and Header. I want this at insertion point. This is going to be an ID. We're going to call this Header. No capital letters. Double check the spelling, H-E-A-D-E-R. So Header will be the name of the HTML tag, and it'll also be the name of the CSS rule. Let's make this a new CSS rule. It's telling me it's going to be listed as hashtag header. It's an ID, and it's asking me where do I want to save this code. Well, I do not want it on this document. I want to select that movies.css. Make sure this time, please, select movies.css and OK. Now once again, it's going to come to this properties window. I could add some properties in here, and you can do that if you know how, but I'm going to skip that for now. OK. OK. There we are. We have the header, ID, opening and closing tag. We put some default text in there. We can leave that in there for now. And it's linking to that ID header whereas the container is linking to the ID container. How does it do that? Up here in my head section, Dreamweaver has written the code link href equals, and in quotes, the pathway to that CSS folder and to that movie CSS. So what happens in the browser, it opens up the HTML document and it reads the HTML code, and it also sees the CSS code. It looks up here, the CSS code is linked through the head section here, and the browser can apply those CSS rules to the HTML. And that's how you see the completed website in your browser. Alright, let's add our next section. Now this is going to be outside of the header, and hit enter once we're still in the container, but we are outside of the header underneath it. The next thing we're going to add, the next area, is our navigation. So I'm on Insert, HTML, Navigation. I want to at the insertion point and give this the ID nav. You could call it nav, navigation, nav bar. Let's call it nav bar. No capital letters. This is a new CSS rule. By this time, it should be going to the correct place, the movie CSS, automatically, and it's labeling it as an ID navbar or hashtag navbar. OK. I'm going to skip this part for now and hit OK here. We'll leave the default text that is placed in there. We'll come back and change that later. My next section is going to be outside of the navbar. Hit enter. And this one's going to be what we call an aside. Let's make sure we're on Insert, HTML, Aside. At insertion point, we're going to give this an idea of aside. You can also call it, some people call it a column, right column or left column, and a sidebar. Let's just call it an aside for now. New CSS rule. Hashtag aside is going to the right place, movies.css. Okay. Let's skip this section for now, this part for now, and OK. We'll leave the default text and we'll enter our next area. Our next area is going to be next to the aside. It's going to be a main section. At insertion point, ID. We're going to call this, we could call it main. You also see it called content. In the diagram in the assignment it's called content, but let's call it main in here. You could call it content if you want, it's up to you. It's going to be an ID, lowercase MAIN, new CSS rule. It's going to be a hashtag, main, ID main. It's going to my movies CSS sheet, and OK. Let's skip this for now. OK. And leave the default text. Just click to the right of the main and hit enter. Our last area is going to be the footer. Footer at insertion point. Let's make it an ID. Hashtag footer. New rule. Oop, I added a hashtag that time. I should have just let Dreamweaver do that. Movies CSS. Good. And OK. Let's skip this. OK. Now I let Dreamweaver do quite a bit of this writing of the code through that interface, but just keep in mind you could type this out yourself. If you're doing this on a different code editor or a text editor, you could pause this video right now, type up all this code here, then go to the movie CSS sheet, pause the video, and type all the stuff up there. If you are creating this through a text editor, you can create a separate sheet, save it as a .css in that folder. Dreamweaver just makes things, I think, a lot more easier. Okay, I have a lot of space here, I can get rid of that. Once again, we have our HTML opening and closing tag, the head section at the top, with that link to our CSS sheet. We have our body tag. Within that body tag, we have the ID container. Within that container, we have the header, navbar, aside, main section, and our footer. Let's look at the live view and see what that looks like. File, save, since we've been working on it for a while. Alright, so we have all these different sections with some default text in them. The container should not have default text. That's just sort of a box that holds all the other sections together. Well, now we can add CSS code, CSS properties to all these to really format the look and layout of this website. The first thing I'm going to do is click on this head section. And then the nav bar, just so you can see the different sections here. But the section I really want to change first is the container. Now there's no text in there, so it's sort of hard to see. What I can do is click on this head section and arrow up on my computer keyboard, and it should select the div container. There it is. Now remember, I have my CSS ID already created. I can come to my CSS designer and adjust some of the properties. I can go to current. My selector is called hashtag container. It's an ID. I want to make sure show set is not selected, and there's all my properties I can add. One of the first things I'm going to do is with my layout, I'm going to ascribe a width to this according to pixels, px. Now we're going to do sort of a default size resolution, default size for this container. It's going to be 1024, 1024 pixels, 1024px. Next, the height for that container is going to start out at 768px. Okay, now we may come back later and change that, but I just want you to be able to visualize that there's this box here, a big box denoted by this blue margin here, that's going to hold everything else in it. And we're going to try to keep the size around 1024 to 768 as we're starting. The next thing I want to adjust is the margins. The margins, I can scroll down to this interface here. If I need a little more room, I can click on this window and slide it down. And this is going to be 0 auto 0 auto for my margin. On the right and left, I can type in the word auto. And on the top, I'm going to leave it as 0. And then on the bottom, I'm going to leave it as 0. Of 0 auto 0 auto, that's going to center that container in the window, in the browser window. Otherwise, it would just be aligned left. Well, we want that centered in our browser window. Okay, our next area we're going to adjust is the header. I can click the header out here, and I can go to my CSS designer, current header. I can also work from the code side, as we know. Header, CSS designer, current header. But let's look at the live view for now until we get used to this. Header, hashtag header, so that's selected. Show set is off. For this, we're going to adjust the layout. This is going to go all the way across. We're going to do it by pixels, and all the way across will be 1024. For the height, we're going to make this height, according to pixels, 100 pixels. 1024, we want to keep that. Now the 100, I think that'll look pretty good. You could always come back and change it later if you think that's too big or too small. And the next thing we're going to change is the background. We could add a background image, gradient, or color. For now, we're just going to do a background color. And since it's the first CSS layout we're doing, let's see how ugly we can make this as we're creating it at this stage, and then we can adjust the look and the aesthetics of it later. So let's see how ugly we can make this. It's a nice hot pink there. So there's my header section. We'll change this text later. Next, let's click on our navigation bar, or nav bar. Same thing. I want to make sure I'm on current, nav bar, layout, and my CSS designer. And let's do the width. This is going to go all the way across according to pixels. 1024, 1024 pixels. The height of this guy, I'm going to make 40 pixels. And once again, you can always change that later if you don't like it. Let's go to the background. And the background color. Once again, we're just going to make things sort of ugly for now for fun, and we'll come back and adjust them later. We'll make that nice lime green. Our next is our aside. Now this is called aside because it's usually aligned left or right. Click on the aside. Let's make sure we're on current. Hashtag aside. And let's do the layout for that. Width, according to pixels. Let's do 150 pixels. And the height, I've already calculated this out. We'll make the height of this 588. It's not some magic number. I just want to fit into my container. We can, like I said, we will adjust some of these later. 588. This will just help us visualize things. This is the first time doing this. Let's go to the background color, and whatever color you want. A nice ugly yellow color will be good. Our next section is going to be our main. Now you can see this aside, since it does not go all the way across that 1024, is aligning left automatically. Let's click on that ID main CSS rule over here. Let's adjust the width. Now we had 1024 to work with. This one's going to snap up right next to the aside. So we have about 874 left if I did my calculations correct. I'm going to adjust this according to pixels. The width is going to be 874. And the height is going to be 588. And I'm going to put a background color on this. Okay, I have a problem here. It is not snapping up there. And here's how we're going to fix that. We're going to have to give it another code, another CSS property in order to snap it right up here. And let's apply that code to all the different div tags. Let me click on this header again, hashtag header, layout. Let's scroll down underneath margin and padding and position. Let's float this left. Good. Now we're going to select the nav bar and make sure we're on the nav bar here and float left. That will snap it right underneath there. If I'm having trouble accessing that through the live view, I can go to the code view. Same thing over here. Let's click the aside, layout, slide down, float left. Let's click the main, float, make sure I'm on the current. Well, if I can't seem to find it, I can go to all and slide down to main, layout, float left. And now my footer. Let's go to live view just so you can see what happened. Since I've floated everything left, it automatically knocks down the next section. Next one will go to the left, and now that main area will go to the right up to next to this aside. And our last section we need to adjust with CSS is the footer. Let's click on the footer here. Or you could click on it on the code side. Current, footer, layout, width, according to pixel. Let's make that go all the way across. 1024, 1024 pixels, and the height is going to be 40 pixels. Like I said, you can always change that later. I can scroll down and see that website. Oh, let's go back to the footer. I've left it white. I want to add a little color to that. Just keep in mind you can add background colors, images, textures, gradients, whatever you want. Footer, CSS designer, footer, background color, and why not a nice purple. Layout. In order to see that correctly, that footer has to float left. So let's float that guy left, and there we are. Haven't saved for a while. Let's save this. Save all, and we're good.